Alrighty, so Exodus chapter 18, where some things get figured out. I am curious what your all's initial reaction to this passage is.
Well, I just thought it was kind of neat that somebody said you're trying to do too much. You need to delegate, and you need to layer it this way to make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and teach people the rules so you don't have to keep telling them. So you don't have to be a judge and make a decision. You should know the rules, and then let them handle the little things. That sounds so colloquial in the translation. I just was surprised, and bring the big things to me. Yeah. But this is his father-in-law. I didn't remember that he had left his wife and sons.
Yeah.
So we'll get to Zipporah and kind of some of the dynamics going on there. You are right. It did not mention that. But yeah, Larry?
Jethro is described as a priest of Midian, and he talks about the Lord. Now, is he talking about the same Lord that Moses is talking about?
That is a very valid question, and one we don't have an answer to fully. The assumption is in the text that yes, I think the assumption is that Jethro and the God of Israel, or Jethro worships the God of Israel, which is why he's not treated the same way that other outsiders are. But in all reality, if I was to take an actual historical guess, this would be a person who is a priest who recognizes many gods, including this God. That would be my guess. Just in the way that some of the way that this is phrased is kind of like, oh yay, I'm so happy this God came through for you.
For you, yeah, right.
So he can exist in a polytheistic world. How interpreters will, like, I think classic interpretation makes it sound more like he is in the monotheistic world, but I think all likelihood he wouldn't be.
Okay, good.
But he's impressed by what
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So any other first thoughts of this passage? What I think of it as, I on Sunday I mentioned that, or I took a quote from Jurassic Park, which is like one of my favorite movies, and I remarked that it was a scene that I hated as a child because I thought it was boring, and now it's like, oh, that's where all the interesting dialogue is. That is actually kind of how I see this passage. It's not flashy, it doesn't have it's not like the 10 plagues where like things are going on and there's all these images, and yet there is almost a point where it's like, oh, this is so necessary to understand how things were working. And so it's interesting because it almost feels like we get to peel back the layer and see how the society's functioning versus how it will function. So I am a weird geek for this passage, so bear with me as we walk through it. So starting off, Jethro evidently gets word that there's a wandering band of people in the area, and he's like, oh, that's probably my son-in-law. And he goes to him, and it says, after Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro took her back along with her 2 sons. You are correct if you're like, wait, whatever happened to Zipporah?
Yeah.
I Googled just to make sure my assumption was correct. Zipporah is only mentioned 3 times in scripture total. Her introduction, the scene where on the road where she cuts off a piece of someone and sticks it on Moses's feet, that whole dramatic, weird scene. And this is the last time we'll hear about her or Moses's sons. So this is about it. The commentators down below indicate that the phrasing of Moses sent her away, that phrasing is used in Deuteronomy to imply divorce.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
So the Mhm. So the implication is somewhere in this process, Moses divorced Zipporah.
Hmm.
There's also magically a second son. We knew about the first son. The second son is kind of happens somewhere in the process. And so I'm curious what you all think of this whole situation of an implied divorce, a second son, and this is the last time. This is only the third time we've heard of her, and the last time. Yeah, Mary Ellen.
Well, I think it's interesting that if, excuse me, it's the first time I've talked today. If Moses did divorce her and sent her back to her father, that Jethro is hearing about this tribe of people and recognizing that that would be his former son-in-law. And then he ups and takes Moses's family back to him.
Yeah.
And there's no more commentary, no more information on it at all. And so it's not like Zipporah plays a role here, Jethro does. And Jethro comes in as kind of the voice of common sense. So that whole family dynamics interests me, but there's no more information, so whatever.
Right. Yeah, Larry?
Well, the first reading, that's exactly what I thought. Geez, Moses must have gotten rid of his wife,
Yeah.
and she's gone back to her family, But then all of a sudden, Jethro comes and Moses rushes out and kisses him. And, there's this big happy, and I thought, well, maybe he sent her off for protection. They were going to have this big upheaval and go up. Then it comes to the kids' names. And the youngest one is named after being delivered from Pharaoh out of Egypt. Well, where was the kid got his name when he was born, So the name must have been, they must have been together around the time this child was born. So sounds complicated.
Right. Yeah, you all have picked up on all the details of this is one of those where we get just enough information to be like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Because the implication by the second kid's name is that Zipporah was in Egypt for a time. They had to have time to make and bear a child.
Mm-hmm. And to get delivered.
Yeah.
As the kid's name, the Lord delivered me from Pharaoh. So the kid couldn't have been named, could he, until they'd gotten out?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mary Ellen?
Well, as long as we're on this, that could be whatever mode here. It could have happened that Zipporah gave birth, just before the Exodus and part of the Exodus, and Moses, knowing what was coming ahead, sent her with her newborn and older back to the father, almost as a protection of they'd never survive this journey. But we're all in the supposition mode here, and we don't know anything. We can only guess. So whatever.
Yeah, Clay?
The notes at the bottom of my Bible says that this narrative is out of order. For Israel reached the mountain of God later.
Yep.
So no wonder we're all, confused.
Oh yeah, they get to the mountain of God next chapter. This is all, this is the delightful weirdness of scripture is yes, this is likely out of order. The other aspect of it being, we know this from other naming conventions. If we think back to the baby drama of the two sisters having babies back and forth, the delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh is actually likely in reference to Moses himself, which may refer to his own childhood. of being saved from not being killed, and instead being placed in the basket in the river. If you think of like Rachel being like, oh, my deliverance, like that refers to her, not the child. So the child may actually be named after Moses's experience. So it just to muddy the water even further. But Clay, you're exactly correct. This is likely out of order where the commentators thought that it belonged before. We're getting really close to the Mount Sinai moment. Chapter 20 is when the 10 commandments come in. And so they probably pushed it up in the narrative just to make a little bit of clarity, give some order before all the 10 commandments things happen.
Well, it makes sense. I thought Jethro had decided just to pretend that Moses never divorced her, so just go up.
I mean, in a sense, like Zipporah, if Zipporah's living at home, it's on his dime. So I could see him arriving of like, hey, take your wife back now.
Yeah.
But we actually, this is one of those that after this, we don't know what happens. It's not mentioned whether she stays with Moses. It's not mentioned whether she leaves with Jethro. It's literally a huge question mark. She is absent from scripture. Yeah.
You said leaves with Jethro. Does Jethro ultimately leave? He doesn't stay with the tribe?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, Jethro is this combination of both priest and chief of his own tribe.
Okay.
So he wants to stay being the big man is kind of the assumption. So he goes, helps Moses set up the system that he's kind of been working under, and then he goes back to his own people. He's like, I'm going to let you do you, but you look like you need some extra leadership. You need a leadership training program, Moses. You are not doing well.
It's big. I mean, there are too many people, too many issues.
But
He has
also,
other to be doing.
so the interesting thing is, think about this in context. Like, what have we been talking about for the past 3 weeks?
Leadership.
Leadership and conflict. And so here comes the one solution. The people keep grumbling. Well, we're gonna set up a system to make that work a little better. All right, let's see. Where are we in scripture itself, though? So Moses sees, or like gets to see Zipporah and his children again. They hug and kiss and all that jazz. It seems, I don't know if you all felt this, it feels like Moses is almost better friends with Jethro than he is his own wife. Like,
well, they have more in common.
right.
They play a different role.
Yeah.
Right. And so, kind of getting to Larry's question of like, does Jethro worship like the Yahweh Israelite God? Well, we see in this moment he is willing to. So Jethro tells Moses the rumors that he's heard, and then Moses regales the actual story. And then Jethro kind of does his like priestly, the thing that he does as a priest. He does an offering, which is a burnt offering, and Aaron comes out with all the elders of Israel, and they have like a big old feast together. What I found interesting is in the commentary, it was talking about the word that they used for the specific kind of offering means it's not just like roasting a piece of meat. This is burned up entirely. Like this is giving an offering that's burned to ash as the people are eating bread. And it has the implication that you are eating alongside the deity, that the fire is consuming it like the deity is. And so this is like they're having a feast with God, which I thought was kind of cool. So, I just wanted to bring that up because I know that we've talked about it before of like what was the purpose of like the burnt offerings and the sacrifices. In this context, it's literally sitting down for dinner with God and celebrating the victory. So this is finally the victory feast.
Mhm.
But then we move on. So any comments, anything I skipped over about the conversation and kind of this interplay between Moses and Jethro? Yeah, Larry?
The one thing that sort of makes it sound like this is some sort of important organizational meeting is the comment, then they all went into the tent.
Mm,
You know, they went to some specific place to have this lovely banquet and burn up a lamb, you know.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, Mary Ellen?
Well, I'm looking at 10. Jethro, blessed be the Lord who's delivered you. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods. And you mentioned the pantheistic existence, and here Jethro is acknowledging that the Lord is greater than all gods. And, you know, I like that part. And then he talks about when he delivered the people from the Egyptians when they dealt arrogantly with them. And I thought that was an interesting word to use at that point. So, you know, and I'm also kind of, you know, thinking about the sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses, his father-in-law, in the presence of God. I'm almost seeing a precursor to communion here.
Mhm.
So those are my thoughts.
Yeah. So notably, going on your first point, is greater than all gods. This is where this is still a transitional period because that the wording of that actually implies that there are other gods. It's not the Lord is shown to be the only God. Like only is not in that worldview. It's just, oh, you conquered the gods of Egypt. It's more in that mindset of your God is greater on the hierarchy of all the other gods, but it still kind of implies that all the other gods are still roaming around.
Right.
So that we can still see that transitional idea of to monotheism.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's interesting seeing like having Aaron mentioned by name because Aaron will be the priest. Moses is not a priest. If anything, Moses is closer to an oracle, like speaking on behalf of God, but Aaron's the priest. And so in this feast, Aaron's specifically brought in with elders to someone who acts as in the company of someone who is acting as a priest. So. So the next day after the fun celebration, Moses settles into his little seat and starts letting the people come forward. Just like, I guess, form a line and let me hear you. It just seems like Moses is like, okay, we've been wandering enough, time now to hear people's problems, and he's just hearing them one at a time. So what do you all think of Moses's knee jerk? Okay, let's hear the issues, come forward.
Well, that's what the Israelites have been doing, is complaining to him for how long now? Ever since they've been out wandering around in the desert, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's an impossible situation. There are thousands of people in this horde, and there is no way that he could get through 100 in a day. You know, it's just set up as an impossible situation, and he has to be totally exhausted by all of this demand on him. And also, he's not doing anything else. He needs to be doing other things than just sitting and listening to the complaining major and minor, whatever. So it's a really poor use of his abilities. And I think his father-in-law came in at the appropriate moment. Said,
Mhm.
what are you doing? Is this a leadership?
So what the thing is, like, this is the knee-jerk assumption of what leadership is. Why does he go to this model? Like, or just like out of default, he's like, okay, let's do this. Like, what about this imitates leadership?
Well, one of the sort of organizations, governmental organizations, is to decentralize. And as you decentralize, each person has fewer and fewer tasks to deal with till you get down to the point where you have a group of people that is sufficient to handle the burden. As Mary Ellen said, obviously Moses can't sit there and listen to how many thousand Israelites complain. So you got to decentralize. You got to have somebody else take, you know, the things, and you just deal with the important one because you're the big cheese.
Yeah, but what are the rules? I mean, is one of the rules don't complain? I mean, how are they going to decide what the rules are?
See, they have to set up their whole society. Like Egypt, they had a structure, there was rules, and now they're in a ruleless system. They are like this side of anarchy, and the only rule that they have is Moses makes the decisions. And so it sounds like he doesn't even think to decentralize, Larry, as you said. He's just like, okay, people keep coming to me, I guess I'm gonna lead them. And it's that
I'm the leader.
almost like being so focused on the trees of all the individual issues that he forgot about the forest.
Yeah.
That it's almost so bogged down in the, like, they keep complaining, I'm just gonna sit down and I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna sit down and do it, and like almost forgetting to ask for help, which is, I think, a very human thing of like forgetting support networks and that you don't have to do everything.
Also, leaders often don't want to give up their power. And any decentralization is going to dilute the leader's power. But you're letting other people make decisions.
The threat.
But you have to supervise, keep an eye on it.
You also have to trust people giving the power to.
Yeah.
You know, and that goes down from, you know, the central core that he chooses, and then, you know, the ones below that, you know, and he has to give up his leadership in the minutia, and trust other people to handle it without his guidance. So that's a huge move for Moses to empower these other people.
So do you think Moses right now trusts the people?
That he has much reason to trust them. They've been really annoying. And I'm grateful.
Yeah, because I feel like to trust someone, you have to trust that they're on your side.
But he has no reason to trust them because in his experience, he was solving all the problems.
Right.
Well, he didn't have any confidence that anybody could do anything but himself.
So, it makes me think of something I used to do for, it's called like the Low Ropes Initiative course. So I was a facilitator for climbing wall, low ropes, and high ropes. A lot of us know the high ropes because they're like little obstacle courses in trees, and those are really fun, but it's an individual thing. Low ropes are kind of similar obstacle courses, but they're on the ground and they require teamwork. They were one of my favorite things to do with campers because it required problem solving and communication. And I loved seeing how they figured things out.
Mhm.
And there is one though, I only did it a few times because like you had to have a group that was willing to work together, but it was the trust fall. And it's not just a trust fall where like one person falls on level ground. No, this course had a trust fall with a platform that was about 5 feet off the ground. Right. And this is why you had to have a group that trusted each other to do it. And what you had to do is like the people on the ground had to have their arms out like this, lock the elbows, and you would your hands would be far enough apart that someone else's hands would be in the center, and basically you would zipper together. And if you zippered together with a group of it, you needed at least like 9 or 10, you could catch anyone. But the fascinating part is the person on the platform,
Yeah.
because there's the way that it goes well and the way that it doesn't go well. The thing you have to do to make it go well is fall as straight and as stiff as a pen, which means you have to just keel over sideways. What most people want to do is bend at their hips so their butt goes first. The issue is that zipper will break if your butt hits it first, because it's one point of impact versus a stick falling where everyone bears your weight. And it's so difficult at times. Luckily, I often did it with kids that were like really skinny. So like I would position myself so like I would take most of the weight even if they didn't do it correctly. But it's a fascinating exercise, if only because if you rely on yourself, it will not work. It will backfire. You will get hurt. And that's actually how it fails. But you will not feel the support system kick in until the last moment. And it's this paradox of like trusting means that there will be a moment of free fall. And it is scary, which is why a lot of people don't. So trusting, yeah, Clay,
You are reminding me of a graduate class like a million years ago, and it was for counseling. And you had to stand, each person had to stand in the center at one point with the rest of the group around you and just fall straight backwards and trust that they would catch you. Gosh, I'd forgotten all about that. And you're right, it was extremely scary, but it worked. It seemed to work for everybody. Wow.
I always said, no, thank you. I wasn't doing it. You can see where my trust level was.
So trusting sometimes, especially when you have been like the point person, feels like free falling, feels like people aren't going to catch you until the moment they do. And I think that can be the paradox of leadership, is you think you're alone, but if you don't give up power, you will be alone because you're hoarding it. People won't step up to the bat. And it's important, I think, in organizations to realize this, not just when you're like the point person standing at the pulpit, but I've seen leaders struggle, or I'll use my mom as an example because that's a different church, a different system. I won't pick on you all. But my mom had this paradox because she was in charge of the mission committee, and she needed to find volunteers, and they had like certain things where they needed like 10 people. And she was struggling so hard to find all 10 people. And so anytime there was a gap, she would end up volunteering. And I kept trying to tell her, stop doing that, because no one will ever, there are people who will not sign up to help with this thing if they know you're going to do it in the end. That sometimes over-functioning volunteers disempower other people who would if push came to shove. And over-functioning volunteers tend to take too much on because they think it's needed. And sometimes things have to fail once or twice, and then people start volunteering again. It's fascinating.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So back to Moses.
Yes, back to Moses. So Jethro's advice is to get representatives over thousands of hundreds of 50s and of 10s. What do you all think of this breakdown of have someone over these different sizes of people and kind of triage the problems on the way up?
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah? Is it a good set of numbers, those thousands, hundreds, 50s, 10s?
Well,
I think-
number, in the Bible, I think numbers are relative.
They are. So this is interesting, if only because I feel like we still in some ways do this model today.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So
yeah.
where are other systems that we're seeing this kind of triage, this hierarchy, this of 10s, of 50s, of hundreds? Where do we see it? Yeah, Mary Ellen?
Our government or our establishment of the states and the power and how it's distributed down to counties and towns and on down as the power diminishes, but so more people are involved and more problems are addressed, not solved necessarily, but addressed. So it's a kind of a breakdown to a smaller amount of power.
Yeah, Larry?
Well, the military always talks about the chain of command. And you go all the way up the ladder till you get to the guy at the top, and you're involving people with fewer and fewer responsibilities as you go down the ladder. So, your squad commander has less responsibility than the division commander, than and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Other places?
Mhm.
I can think distinctly of at least two others that come to mind for me. Any others for you all?
Well, a similar sort of thing in emergency rooms, they always talk about triaging people. In other words, you have to sort the people, but that's a matter of the person, deciding what categories different levels of people go into. But I think it's a way of being certain everybody is taken care of in the way that they should be. That's the idea of it.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need a surgeon like a brain surgeon doing stitches.
Correct.
right. And also the church,
Mhm.
especially the Presbyterian church, not the Congregational church. The Presbyterian church has, it starts with session. The problem really is that the people that are on these various levels aren't necessarily, I'm not saying it in the church especially, but in the government, there's a lot of incompetence. There are people that don't do anything. When I was chairman of Buildings and Grounds, this is when I was first on session. I got to do it because no one else wanted to. And that was back when you had we became unicameral, I guess, before that we had the trustees were separate.
Mm.
And so it was a new thing. And there were about 8 or 10 men. And one person, they were just great, absolutely great. Turned out they were all wonderful. Dave Sizzbus, I wish he were still here. Anyway, so they were all great, but there was one person who never did what he volunteered to do.
Mm.
I didn't know what to do about that. So after it was funny, but I could say they would divide up the responsibilities after arguing, an hour about what was the best kind of light to put in the ceiling. And they would do it, that's how buildings and grounds still function. They do it. They just take it on and do it. And I want them to get credit. But there's this one person, what do you do about that when people just don't do what they're supposed to do? And of course, it's one of my triggers. You got to do what you're supposed to do. But that bothers me more if it's a person who's in charge. And he never really volunteered for anything that was essential. I made sure of that, but I don't know what you do. There are people in Congress that don't do anything. There are people in Congress that do nothing but obstruct. So what do you do about that?
So here's actually, you pose an interesting conundrum, Sue. I'm gonna hold on to that. I'm gonna hold on to that conundrum though, because I know Mary Ellen was gonna I think you were about to jump into.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wanted to comment on Larry's triage example and just mention that that's what needs to happen below the leadership and how the levels of power are set up. Triage happens at the bottom. And we haven't talked about how that happened in this situation with Moses. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah. So I think two models we could think of is there's like the triage where there's like you have your intake information and from that point you decide which way to go, versus like the US court system, which was one of the other models I was thinking of, which everything starts at the lowest level and then gets kind of ratcheted up, which is my guess of what's more happening here. But rewinding back to what Sue was saying, Sue, you are exactly correct. When the Presbyterian set up its governance, this is what it was looking at. Like, this is the scripture that guided the structure of the Presbyterian Church. Voila, there it is. I mean, in some sense, the system of like of bishops and cardinals and all of that, it is also based on this. We do it slightly differently, but this is what people looked at when setting it up. So spot on. So looking at our own system or using the actual numbers that they have in here, which I do find interesting, the person ruling over the tens, Sue, that was you. You were the representative from session that governed the hundreds or the hundreds of the church at the time. And we had a subcommittee that governed over the tens for the work that needed to be done for the building. We can see the thousands at the time was the presbytery. We had two other levels, the Senate and GA, which were bigger. But you can actually see how this work kind of gets broken out and the logic of it that, yeah, it really helps to have the session point person over like the small committees. And so one of the issues of this system, so is in our government, in our church system, we rely on representative democracy. It is not a coincidence that these two have a very similar system. And one of the drawbacks and the issues is, what do you do when one part of the system breaks down? So in an ideal world, if there is a non-functional part of this triage system, what do you do? Just hypothetically.
Well, what I didn't really know anything about buildings and grounds. It was really a weird situation, but I should have talked to someone about it, but I didn't, or I might have complained. People are so responsible at Northminster. They are amazing. They take on a job and they do it. And Sunday, I was a little over volunteered, and Clay stepped in and sort of helped me. I knew that would be no problem with me being in a meeting. I knew somebody would do that. So that's an amazing thing. I don't know whether, and we don't really have elections because we have to beg people to be on committees. It's always been like that. There's never been a vote between somebody and somebody else. We don't want to have that. That's too nasty, I guess. I don't know. Or there just aren't people who want to do things. But it turns out that people who volunteer are usually pretty good. So, but knowing what to do when people aren't doing very well, and there are, I think what happens in the church is that somebody else does it. They can step in and do it. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
It depends too upon what the purpose of your organization is.
Yeah.
Are you setting this up to maintain control over everything? Or are you setting it up solely so everybody has a job and everything's fine, and as long as everything works? But if something goes wrong,
Yeah.
okay, then you've got to have some other mechanism to remedy the situation, other than the fact that somebody above them has control over what they should be doing. So I sometimes I think the whole program's been set up just so the people at the top can maintain control over everything that's going on below them, rather than solely so everybody has a job and things are running smoothly and so forth.
Yeah, it's interesting because the distinction between those is can't be seen from far away. It's in the nuance of it all.
Yes.
I don't, it's, when you say it, having control, I thought it's, well, yeah, but it's also just making sure that things are done and to be report back. Yeah.
Right. So I think that is like a difference in, like, with Northminster, the thing that we care about is that the work gets done in the end. Like, we want everyone to feel like they have say in this organization. We want buy-in. The thing to help with buy-in is making sure people have something to do. I've heard more than once that the thing that keeps them coming on Sunday mornings is because they have something to do as a part of worship, which is, I appreciate the honesty, but it like shows the value in having commitments other than just show up, we like you. Whereas, I mean, Sue, one of the examples you brought up was like our government is structured similarly, but that feels less like making sure the work gets done and more like consolidation of power.
Yeah.
And so that's one where there's a lot of subterfuge of like making it, or the system's not working. I think most people can agree we are not getting done what we want to get done because there's a lot of jockeying for power and control. So the question once again is, I think one of the issues of this system is, what do you do when the pieces aren't working together? When the different levels, or the different people on the different levels, when there is not trust, when there's a breakdown of that reliance, when they are doing the trust fall and intentionally sticking their butt out. So
Very scary things are happening because of that.
Right. So in the end, Moses thinks to himself, okay, Jethro sounds like a good advice. I don't want to be worn out. Complete side note, evidently Jethro's whole like speech to Moses here is full of puns. I could only catch a few of them, but he's using words in weird ways, which is, the notes are saying, it shows that he is witty and wise. So a show of wisdom in the ancient world. Anyway, so Moses thinks that this is wise and goes with it. And the interesting aspect of this whole chapter is the fact that God is mentioned as having acted but none of what's happening is instructions from God. It is actually human wisdom that's setting all of this up. This system of governance is human construction, is human wisdom. And what do you all think about that fact that in the end, this is not God requiring us to do it this way, but in the end is the advice of a chief who's been doing a priest and a chief that's been doing this for a while.
Oh, and it seems, judging from the way God's been acting, you know, with all these tests and killing people, and I mean, I think Jethro is a good alternative.
Okay.
He's much more sensible. He doesn't, you know, test people and torture, and I think the picture of God in Exodus is really scary. I mean, I could not worship a God like that. But they did. I guess they did, but
yeah, Gary?
Somehow, I never felt that Jethro just showed up out of the blue. I think that God was behind the whole process.
oh, maybe. I never thought.
To have somebody help Moses out in providing some kind of order and to start building some type of society. So I don't think that the Lord was shocked when Jethro showed up.
Well, it's a nice way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Well,
there's got to be some way to bring order out of chaos. I mean, the Israelites have been existing in a very chaotic situation. The time in Egypt, they are abused. Then God abuses the Egyptians to try to get them out. Now they're out wandering around in the desert and they don't know where they're going, and something's got to change.
Well, and God was doing it all. He was providing food. He stepped in all the time. So, and then Moses became the only person besides God that was doing anything. And then, so it makes sense that we would have, somebody intervene.
So here's a final thought for you all. Practical solutions is not the same as a godly solution. That there is a practical, functional thing going on right now. They need order. They need to figure out a way to organize their society. And this is one solution. And it's better than what they had, but it's not instituted by God. And I am always fascinated looking around at when we have deified human solutions for practical issues. Because what is coming up is the actual like stone tablets where this is not written. And so it's a wonder of if this solution stopped working, and it will stop working and they will find other solutions, are they able to see the difference between the things that are being asked of them from God versus the advice of someone who's seen a lot, done a lot, and had some advice for where they were at that point in time? Yeah, Mary Ellen.
Well, you can also look at it from the point of view that Jethro arrived at the moment that he was needed. And he also, in the beginning, made the comment that he now believed that the Lord that Moses was worshiping was the Lord above all these other gods. And it could be said that the Lord put Jethro in place at the time Moses needed him.
Correct. Oh, I am not doubting that. It's just when the next issue arises, who is being called forward to offer advice, and are we so tied to the previous advice giver that we don't hear the current advice giver?
Mm, mm.
So very much, I do think God, or it is, I have experienced this in my own life. God seems to have placed people in my life to guide me in a right direction, to point
Yeah.
the way. Oh, take care. But what happens when the advice needs to change because the system you set up is not working?
Mhm, mhm.
So look, I bring this up because just looking ahead, because I like knowing where the story goes. In the end, Moses doesn't get to go into the promised land.
Mhm.
He stays on the mountain in the end and watches the people enter, which means that this system only works as long as Moses is alive, and they will have to set up a new system once they enter the promised land, and they struggle for a while. And so they have one system when they're kind of conquering the land and fighting people. That's the book of Joshua. What arises next is the book of Judges, where they don't really have a centralized leader. They just have a judge that rises up to give rulings in the time of need. But then the people are like, we need a leader, we need a centralized figure. This isn't working for us. And so they create a king. And the king system lasts for 3 kings, technically. 3 kings before that system itself shatters. And so you can see how they continue to reinvent themselves.
Mhm.
So it's
Mhm.
always a question of what advice do we need to take from the past, and where do we need to change to address the issues of the future?
Mhm.
Yeah, you
So
really, really need to be able to identify it's not working.
mhm, mhm,
Yeah, have the power to change it. I mean, the things that aren't working in the government now, they work well enough for one, like the electoral college, which clearly isn't working. It's not fair, and everybody agrees into that, but they don't. It wouldn't. It requires a constitutional amendment, and that's going to run into the people for whom it is working. Won't, it's just impossible to change things. It's just set up that way. Making changes is very difficult when things aren't working in our government anyway.
mhm. Yeah. So any final thoughts for today about this practical chapter?
Well, like Sue mentioned, the practical aspect of the judges at various levels, you still are going to be faced with their competence and their commitment to their job, or being responsible, accountable. So those are the issues that this structure is just a skeleton, but there's so much more goes to making it work.
100% yes. If you ever want a depressing read, Google promoted to incompetence, which is a theory that you're promoted until you're ineffective, and then you stay at this upper level. You're never like demoted to where you're effective again. You're promoted until you are ineffective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Larry, what were you gonna say?
Well, unfortunately, sooner or later, not only does incompetence seep in, but so does corruption.
Mhm.
The more power the people get, the more they end up stealing from everybody else. And that for some reason seems to be a basic of human nature.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The capacity to be wonderful and the capacity to be awful, evil.
Yeah, they're very close together.
Right, folks. Well, that is all I have for you all today then. Shall we close in prayer?
Yep.
All right. Let us go to God. Gracious God, we look to the wisdom of those that have gone before us as we read scripture. It's interesting to see how the wisdom of leaders from thousands of years ago still rings true in some ways today. That we look for ways to make the world we live in functional, to make it so no one person is overwhelmed with duties and responsibilities, ways that we learn to trust each other so the system is functional and we can have a fruitful, abundant life. But we also know that, Lord, that this system is fraught with imperfections. That even while we see the wisdom in it, we also see the gaps that it leaves. The amassing of power, the seeping in of corruption, the incompetence from the people in the system. So I ask that you guide us so we can see the issues, so we can work on the change. Help us be guided by your wisdom, not for wisdom to put something in place that will never change, but God, we know that you are active, you are flowing, and like a river, you ask us to live in a world, in time that adjusts in the day to day. So help us find solutions that match that match the spirit as it blows through our communities and through our states and in our world. And guide us when we are in places of leadership, that we may trust the people around us, to do the work that they say they'll do, to lean on each other, and to be able to fall into each other's arms. Because God, in the end, we wish to fall into your arms, into your loving embrace and guidance. So we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Of
Chris.
course. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Everybody have a good week.